You share a trait with every single human who's ever lived, but no other animal on Earth has it. It's not your big brain or your opposable thumbs. It's actually this little shelf on your face that we call a chin. Yes, really. And here's the thing. We're not totally sure why it exists. Ever since Homo sapiens was named in the 1700s, the question of how to define our species has been, well, a question. See, when Carl Linnaeus added humans to his system of nature, he didn't include a description of distinct traits like he did for other species. Next to Homo sapiens, he simply wrote a Latin phrase that translates to know thyself. And it turns out that's a lot harder than you might think. Ever since, scientists have struggled to identify traits that are uniquely ours. Many ideas have been proposed, ranging from anatomical to cultural. Humans as the hunters, the tool makers, the large-brained species, for example, have all been debunked. But what hasn't been debunked? Chins. So what is a chin even for, and why do we have them? Something so unique to us must have a purpose, right? Well, maybe not. It could just be an evolutionary accident. But even if that's the case, the chin is still useful, just maybe not in the ways you'd expect. And we brought in paleoanthropologist Ella Al-Shamahi, host of the new Nova and BBC series Human, for a closer look.
Around the time that Linnaeus named Homo sapiens, scientists had already noticed that all of our skulls have a bony, projecting chin. Paleoanthropologists call this the mental eminence or protuberance, and it has a specific anatomical configuration that's present from the time we're fetuses. That configuration is often called the inverted T because it looks like an inverted T. So there's a central ridge that runs down the middle of the jaw, meeting a horizontal section that juts out along the lower edge that's framed by depressions on either side. It's kind of funny that we need to give a technical definition for chins. Like, we all know a chin when we see one, right? But we're not just talking about a random bony bump. This is instead a specific piece of facial architecture, and it's not something that any other animal has. Compare our projection to a chimpanzee's chin, for example. Theirs, like most other animals, basically just slopes backwards in what's called a receding symphysis. When scientists began uncovering fossil human relatives, the pattern became clear. Neanderthals, discovered in the 19th century, had receding chins like chimpanzees. You can see the difference when you compare it to Homo sapiens. And as additional hominin discoveries, so those fossils belonging to species more closely related to us than chimps, began to trickle in, they only added more support to the growing consensus that we alone share this feature. Like our 3 to 4 million-year-old ancestor Australopithecus afarensis, they lack a projection. Even our more closely related ancestor, Homo erectus, is missing this feature as well. So it became increasingly clear that this might be a sort of signature of our species. Scientists began to wonder, what is it for exactly, these projecting chins? And once they dove into that question, they found a mystery. I'll let Callie take it from here.
There have been some wild hypotheses over the years trying to explain why we have chins. Some scientists have suggested they evolved as a clamping device to hold cloth while working, while others have maintained that they are merely decorative features shaped by sexual selection. But the most outlandish? That chins evolved to take a punch. Researchers used data from actual experiments that had Olympic boxers punch a dummy to better understand head injuries, to explore whether this bony reinforcement might help in fights. And they argued that facial features like robust bones and muscles strategically placed around the jaw could better withstand impacts. But ideas like the punching hypothesis often amount to little more than just so stories, seemingly logical explanations that crumble under scrutiny. The more credible ideas that have emerged over the years are centered around other unique features that we often think of as important for humans to be, well, human. The first major hypothesis appeared in a 1913 article called The Story of the Chin. In it, a physician suggested the chin resulted from our complex language abilities. Since human speech requires many different tongue movements and precise muscle coordination, he reasoned that the chin might anchor those muscles, aiding speech production. The problem is, the chin isn't actually the attachment point for those muscles. Instead, the main muscle he highlighted attaches to the inside of the jawbone. So most researchers didn't buy it. Meanwhile, more hominin fossils were being discovered, like Peking man in China, now classified as Homo erectus. These too lacked chins, reinforcing that this feature belonged uniquely to Homo sapiens, which meant that it could potentially be used as a diagnostic feature, helping us recognize our own species from our close relatives in the fossil record. But even as the chin's uniqueness became more clear, its evolutionary purpose remained elusive. In the 1950s, scientists turned to biomechanics, studying how muscles, tendons, and ligaments work together in the lower jaw. And they came up with a new idea, the airway impingement hypothesis, which basically says that chins arose in response to breathing. Specifically, that it was a response to constraints in the respiratory system resulting from our upright posture. But not everyone was convinced. Other researchers stuck with the biomechanical approach, but focused on the other main thing our jaw does: chewing. This seemed more promising because we know Homo sapiens chewing is pretty unique. See, our faces and jaws have shrunk significantly over our evolutionary history, retracting in response to the unique shape of our brain case, a shift that has fundamentally reshaped our facial architecture in the process. And this smaller face and jaw raised a question of what new stresses might this have created? Since bone remodels in response to stress, changing density and shape based on the loads placed on it, maybe the chin is simply a response to chewing pressures. Maybe, these researchers argued, it acted as a buttress, strengthening our smaller jaws for the demands of processing food. For a while, this seemed like the likely answer, but no one had definitively proven it. And around this time in 1967, scientists uncovered the fossil called Omo-1 from Ethiopia, considered to be one of the oldest Homo sapiens ever found at almost 230,000 years old. Omo-1 is pretty fragmentary, but it does preserve the lower jaw, which shows that this human had a prominent chin. This underlined the fact that the human chin is pretty old and added confirmation that it's likely been around since the beginning of our species, which evolved potentially around 300,000 years ago. After almost a century of searching for a purpose, some scientists began asking a radical question. What if the chin doesn't have a function at all? What if it's just there? As weird as that sounds, evolutionary biologists have a term for these non-adaptive traits. They call them spandrels. They're just byproducts of other evolutionary processes, never directly shaped by natural selection. But proving that something is just an artifact is pretty difficult. After all, how do you prove something doesn't have a purpose? So the science on the chin stayed in limbo. It wasn't until the early 1990s that researchers moved away from theoretical approaches and really started putting the chewing hypothesis to the test. One scientist compared the geometry of the human jaw to other primates and found that the proportion of our jaws are unique in how short and broad they are. He then built upon experimental work that had examined the precise stress patterns that different primate jaws experience when eating food, and applied that work to this human shape. This showed that the short, broad shape of Homo sapiens' jaw does in fact create a different set of stresses. And the structure of our bony chin seems to exactly match the needs raised by this distinctive shape and the stresses it causes, he argued. For example, the lower jaw experiences stresses caused by twisting of its left and right halves, called vertical bending. And the outer layer of bone is exceptionally thick, right where vertical bending creates the most stress. down at the base of the symphysis where the two halves come together. Comparing this to other hominins, the researcher pointed out that the timing of the chin's appearance lines up precisely with these changes in jaw proportions. So he argued that the reason the chin doesn't appear until Homo sapiens is because earlier species, from Australopithecus to early Homo, retained those more ape-like jaw proportions, which meant that they didn't need to solve the problem of counteracting this stress because the problem didn't exist yet. So this suggested the chin truly was an adaptive response, one that was responding to changed mechanical demands on the jaw. And while this study has won over some scientists, others are more skeptical and continue to maintain that the chin is just there. In large part because more recent biomechanical modeling reveals that jaws with chins actually aren't any better at handling those particular types of stresses than those without chins. So there's still no consensus on the chin's evolutionary origins. And in recent years, some scientists have argued that all chin hypotheses, functional or not, face some challenges, either on a theoretical level or an empirical one. And while more discoveries of hominin fossils, both others without chins and Homo sapiens with chins, are adding data points to the timeline, they still aren't telling us why this characteristic exists. But what we can say is that even if the chin doesn't actually do anything evolutionarily, it does allow us to identify ourselves in the fossil record, to know ourselves. So something that's functionally useless can still be useful. And as humbling as it is to not know why we have this feature, at least it's given us something that can be listed under Linnaeus's distinctive traits of Homo sapiens, at least for now.
Big thanks to Ella for joining us on this episode. Ella is the host of an amazing new series from Nova called Human that tells the epic story of Homo sapiens as they outlast other human species and spread across the globe. Head over to the link in the description to check it out and tell them Eons sent you.
Did our most famous fossil ancestor, Lucy, who did not have a chin, die by falling out of a tall tree? The answer is part of a decades-long debate over how exactly our ancestors transitioned from life in the trees to life on the ground. Find out more in our episode, How Did Our Most Famous Ancestor Really Die? Chins up to this month's Eontologists.
Addie, Annie and Eric Higgins, Carl Wolfel, Jackie Scott Railston, Jake Hart, John Davidson Ing, Juan M., Melanie Lamb Carnevale, Nico Robin, Raphael Hassa, Tony Dye, and Steve.
Become an Eonite at patreon.com/eons and you can get fun perks like access to the Patreon-only activity feed and behind-the-scenes content. And as always, thank you for joining me in the Annie and Eric Higgins studio. Subscribe at youtube.com/eons for more Pleistocene people. So funny. Now I'm like, not so much UFC, but boxing. Like whoever has the bigger chin, that's who I'm gonna guess is gonna win. Yeah, I wonder if I found a hack to boxing. There's too many ways to get knocked out in UFC, so I don't think the chin would help. But in boxing though, maybe.